Our modern Western culture places little to no value on the power of our nightly dreams to inspire, shift, and reorganize our lives. This podcast demands a deep reconsideration of the role dreams play on our path to a more vital and meaningful life. The following is living proof of the life-affirming power of dreams to affect change and redirect the trajectory of our inner and outer lives. These are the dreams that shape us. When we're ready, even though we may not think we are, the psyche knows how to go to work on us in its very mysterious and, usually to us, unnecessarily hard ways. Its intimate knowledge of us is evident in how tailor-made these experiences can be. It knows all the buttons to all our fears, to all our insecurities, all our wounds, and even our greatest joys and passions. It seems to know the way to get us to those big revelatory moments that our souls really yearn for, but few of us are truly brave enough to follow through on. The psyche and our dreams have a tendency to ask everything of us. Jung even said, "The attainment of wholeness requires one to stake one's whole being. Nothing less will do. There can be no easier conditions, no substitutes, no compromises." And it doesn't do this to punish us, but to reveal to us what's truly inside of us, and to give us experiences that challenge us so deeply, there is no way we can't but be wholly transformed by it, in a way that can't be reversed, that it stands as this monolithic moment in our psychic development. So may you join Dr. Jonathan Hyland as he and Jason explores how this very process went to work on his life. It's so fascinating. I hope you enjoy it.
You know, it's ironic that there is a new Matrix movie that explores the boundaries between reality and what we know as reality, and a true reality that is behind it. And people who explore dreams deeply, they find that this blue pill reality, the ordinary reality that we live in, we breathe in, we participate and live most of our lives in, is actually the surface, like the surface of a bubble. And underneath it is something that is so much more. The Matrix movies are known for exploring this subject, and today we have Jonathan with us, who has taken the red pill and found out how deep the rabbit hole really goes. He was, yeah. This is something that people who explore dreams have said about what they discover. We have an episode coming up with Ian Wilson, who is a good friend of mine who's been lucid dreaming since he was a teenager. He's now in his 50s, and he has watched as the dream landscape formed as he was going to sleep, and found that there was an interactive fabric that began as a simple two-dimensional grid and ended up as a fully realistic three-dimensional interactive landscape for him. And he's discovered that there is something behind the dream that's more than just a dream. And this is what we want to explore with Jonathan today. I know that there are a lot of listeners who have experienced this personally, or there is an intuitive sense. It's kind of like those people who are in the Matrix, who are on the verge of being able to discover that they are in this holographic reality and that there's something more going on behind the scenes, but they're not quite there yet. They know it intuitively, but they haven't been led across that bridge. And it usually requires a mentor or someone who knows, who's already crossed the bridge, who can help you get there. So you need your Morpheus. And of course, Morpheus is the Roman god of dreams, so very appropriate character. So yes, during this season when there's the new Matrix movies out, I have Jonathan with me, and he's been through this experience. He took the red pill. He found out how deep the rabbit hole really goes. And what he has discovered and is going to share with us today, I'll sum it up right now. There is an intelligent awareness behind dreams that will sit there and let you play on the surface layers of the dream. And it will kind of like a parent with the kid in the sandbox, they can sit in the background and just be out of the way and unobtrusive. Or if you get curious, you can engage with that intelligence and find out that well, it's awesome. it's it's universal, and it's there in a very, very personal sort of way. So, Jonathan, welcome to the Dreams That Shape Us podcast. You know that our mission is to teach people, show them through example that there is very deep meaning, personal meaning to dreams, and that you can access that. You can find it out for yourself, and it can shape your life in ways that are very dramatic, or maybe just kind of helping you make decisions. Hey, should I leave my job and go to this other job? Should I marry my honey? Is it the right time to have kids? Is this the right house for me to buy? Kind of surface level decisions. And then, or, life decisions, important ones. But what we want to get into are things that go deeper into the core of who you are, and you as a conscious being trying to figure out, what in the world am I doing here? In other words, you're this conscious being living in this, we're living in this interactive world. And sometimes you step back from it and you go, but is this really, am I more like somebody who's just sitting in a movie right now and I'm watching what's on the screen and it seems perfectly, fully believable? But is there going to come a point when I'm going to walk out of that theater and find out that there was a whole other world that if you never walk out of the theater, you would never know that it was there? And it seems like that's what the experience that you've had, where it led you personally. So can you tell the listeners what led you to try to find out what is really down there at the bottom of the rabbit hole?
Yeah. I can try, certainly. Well, I was struggling with, I was living in the city, New York City, and I was struggling with anxiety that was a real mystery to me, because it wouldn't leave me alone. That there was something, reaching up, from somewhere to kind of make contact, but it was, it took over my social being, which I had a lot of stock in, like I was pretty happy, being, affable and cordial and having some kind of social leverage, some kind of, I liked being happy. I liked being alive. I liked being social. I liked to interact, and that's like my nature. And this was sort of creeping into that, in a way that I couldn't, because I loved to perform. I think that's really what I was saying. I was actually studying theater and trying to become an actor. And so the moment of performance was sort of ecstatic to me and kind of existential, and that there was something very ancient and religious almost in that moment when the curtain opens, when the light comes up, when that contact. And so that became so important to me that I would look for it. I would live with it in everyday moments. It sort of gave me access to the moment, to the conscious moment. But what happened was that like something would shut down in me, as in my performative self. And that, as I would, whether that be on stage or whether that would be in front of, meeting someone, and it's like as if someone sort of turned me down or dampened me, and there was suddenly like your hearing was muffled, and like I couldn't make contact. And that to me that was this incredible sort of psychological pain. And
so by contact, you mean the sort of social contact interaction with a person. When you make contact, you're able to sort of get in touch with them. You can connect with them. And this thing is activating, or it's intruding while you are trying to, be the normal Jonathan. Hey, I'm happy. Let's connect. Let's be friends. We'll have these great conversations. We'll go out and do all these fun things. And it was calling you out of that. Is that what you're saying? It was interfering. And what kind of way? Was it a feeling? Was it a voice?
Well, it was a heightened energy that sort of prevented me from that. I became kind of breathless before, and it became sort of like a high wire walking a tightrope, and so I felt like I had to do something to manage it, so it would be very superstitious. I would have to like not step on the crack, the sort of the typical kind of controls, rituals. So it became very OCD in the sense of like not as in a sort of conventional way, but as a means to sort of manage this presence that was suddenly like I was sort of impregnated by. And so, but
presence meaning like an intelligent awareness.
Well, I wouldn't,
but it's there, or
it felt definitely intelligent because it understood me in terms of what I was trying to do. So it was getting me at my most vulnerable spots.
Yeah.
And so, it was a step ahead of me, so the more that I tried to control it, the more powerful it got. And so to the point where I couldn't perform anymore. I just sort of gave up. And I had to just sort of address it. Which and I'm pretty stubborn. I'm pretty like I can endure a lot. So it definitely, had to surrender, at a certain point.
Yeah.
And that, so that was this sort of interruption in a way. Like, I can't be normal Jonathan. That's not going to work. Like that's, something else is being asked of me.
So Agent Smith has just shown up at your office. If we go back to the Matrix, you remember he's going about his normal day. I show up at the office. Yeah. And he looks over and he sees the guys in the sunglasses, and the secretary points towards his cubicle. And then the phone arrives, or the phone has already arrived, So the phone is sort of this thing, this presence that's made itself aware to you, and now it's calling you up. And the phone is ringing every time you try to get back into normal Jonathan mode, and the phone is ringing, and that there's something on the other end. And when you answer that phone, it's going to get really interesting. Is that fair to say?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, I can picture this. I've been through it, and it's that you start having something that's talking to you from within, and you can't say, well, it's not exactly a voice. you could say that it's a feeling because you feel it. There's definitely a body response, and there's oftentimes a sort of a mental response, and you go, yeah, okay, it's there. I know it is. It's there. It's making itself known to me. But what do I do with it now? And
yeah, well, it felt like it was in my fascia, that it was like in my body. That's what was interesting, is that same image of those black veins that kind of take over the face.
yeah.
So that to me was, it was a really accurate image for me, because it's something that I couldn't ignore.
When Agent Smith, when he inhabits the body of one of the ordinary citizens of Matrix Land, the first thing that happens is that their face gets all veiny, and then it transforms. It morphs from helicopter pilot to now it's Agent Smith, or
Right.
taxi driver, now it's Agent Smith. Okay, so we're making references to the movies. I just want to make sure that the readers are staying at full speed with us here.
Yeah.
So keep going.
Yeah, so it was scary to me, because it was like you can't avoid something in your own body.
Yeah.
And so but there was a weird comfort in that, because I understood that this was a part of me. This was somehow like, this is something that was just as private as any other bodily, and so that there was something to it. There was a validity to it. There was something. It was real. It was real. I mean, like, that was like, okay, so if it's real, then, and this isn't just some sort of like virus or some kind of fucked up curse, then,
or a tick, or a OCD, or
right.
something that would normally lead people to go get medicated. I mean, that's what they
Right.
usually do. Oh, I'm having these intrusive thoughts while I'm, talking with my friends, and this is what you're telling your doctor. And the doctor
Right.
looks through the DSM, the diagnostic manual, and finds the drug that's associated with those symptoms. They'll
Right.
call them symptoms, and then next thing you know, yeah, maybe it's gone away. Maybe it's not,
Right.
but either way, you've now medicated it instead of, well, I think I know where you're going with this.
Right.
It was saying, come to me, Jonathan. I mean,
well, yeah, it was an intimacy, I think that was something deeply intimate about it. And so I was trusting that, even though it felt like it was going against the grain. And I think that's something that I'm, as a person, am open to. It's like this. Okay, if this is that, there is a different or alternative understanding, specifically because of this intimacy. And
Okay.
so I was that's what I was, I think, feeling into, or hoping, or trusting.
So was it coming to you in your dreams too?
At that point, no, I would say that I was not aware of it. I would say was absorbing all my psychic energy.
Okay. So I know that you ended up at Pacifica Graduate Institute. And for the listeners out there, if you want to be able to study subjects that are related to psychology, spirituality, the study of consciousness, but learn it in a way that is delves outside of the standard curriculum. If you can find it, got a lot of graduate schools, some standard sort of places, they don't, look for a course on dreams in a graduate psychology program. Good luck. You might find a module in one class. You might find one module about dreams. You won't find anything about dream interpretation and analysis. You won't find anything about exploring dreams as a route into your own being and consciousness. So if you want to go off the beaten path and yet learn from people who are very well established and have great reputations. You have Pacifica as a choice. And well, if you're on the other coast, you have Atlantic University. Both of them are accredited schools where you can get graduate degrees. So I know that this is where we're going, and I hope that I haven't jumped ahead too far. But I was thinking Jonathan is going through something and he's searching now. He's experiencing something that is taking all of his time and focus, his energy. It's disrupted his life. It's made it itself known to him in a way that is very intimate and personal. And the next step is, I mean, if you're like me, you want to know what that thing is.
Right.
And, for me, it was turning to Carl Jung. I had a mentor who knew a lot about, we were in dream-based therapy. So he was my therapist, and he knew he'd been educated in all this stuff. He'd gone into Joseph Campbell and Carl Jung and, the just so many rabbit holes that he'd gone into. So he ended up becoming a guide for me, pointing me towards the right places where I could get this knowledge and information to understand the thing that was engaging with me and disrupting my life in the way that, and if you were, I don't know how old you were when this was going on, but I was about 26, 27 when it really, started making itself aware. And by the time I was about 28, I was in a full blown, there's different words that people use, but we'll just say transformative experience, and engaged with that thing that is the intelligence, that's behind all of reality, and that we can most readily access, I think, for most people in their dreams. So am I getting you? Is Pacifica soon in your future from this point where you're talking about where you're still living in New York and you're
I was
looking.
So I had turned to sculpture, which ironically I think Jung had done as well. And so I was carving stone, and I was, because in that, interestingly enough, that was the first like medicinal progression of this dialogue, because it went from something kind of more abstract and intellectual, like acting or, the social, sphere, to something concrete, and tactile.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, you had said that you were starting to kind of feel it in your fascia, like it in your skin. And here I am, I'm picturing you now going into sculpting, and I'm like, that's not a coincidence.
Right. It was Carrara marble, which is this beautiful substance that you can, and the whole idea is that you're uncovering this image, you're uncovering something that's already there. And so you're tracking the veins, and you're tracking the patterns and the shapes. So it was really already shaping me in terms of the sensitivity. And I learned from this old Jamaican guy this guy gave me a old Portuguese hammer, and then this old point, and they taught me how to like just listen, and the music and the rhythm of it, and the relationship with the stone. And so I was just completely engrossed, and I would walk out of there at midnight, at 1 a.m. and just walk across the park and just be in just this kind of bliss. But just sort of like a wild, I just felt more wild, and like, and I grew up in Manhattan, so that was like in the concrete. I felt like I was, birthed out of the concrete. So it was like it was like a redemptive moment.
And the park is Central Park. You said you.
So it was, and it was the Art Student League, which was like one of the oldest buildings in the city. So it was like this weird initiation, like that now that I'm saying it, it's interesting. I can, it makes perfect sense to me, this natural, like what else would have been medicinal at that moment than doing that? And then the next, and then I had stumbled on Jung just memories, dreams, and reflections, like most people who sort of, that's their sort of entry.
Which is Jung's biography, right?
Yeah, it's his sort of autobiography that he'd worked. It's a I'm looking at it right now. It's him and Yella Jaffe, I think, and it's what's amazing about it is that it's hyper curated and edited because it leaves out these really formative, wild, what he thought controversial moments that, so even in that,
Yeah.
in its PG medium was like just enough for me, because he talked about this personality number one and personality number two, that there was this tension between them. Like he would say something like, am I sitting on the stone, or is the stone, is the stone sitting on me? Like this kind of this question of agency and this tension between two kinds of experiences, and
which can sound ridiculous to people who are living so fully on one side of the equation that they have no idea that there's the other. They would say, well, why would you ask? That's a silly question. Am I sitting on the stone, or is the stone sitting on me? Am I part of the stone experiencing itself? Because, like the person on top of the stone is an extension of the stone, and the stone itself is realizing itself through you sitting on it. So there's this sort of philosophical idea about it that people who start to really question reality and existence, they get. But imagine, Jonathan, imagine yourself 5 years before this started. Let's just use that as a starting point. What would the Jonathan from 5 years before then say to the Jonathan who's now starting to question whether he is the stone or the stone is him? Like that perspective of somebody who has not been initiated or isn't going through initiation. What does the other perspective say about it?
Well, I would only wish that that Jonathan spoke to that Jonathan then, because then, I think I would have been pretty. I think that's exactly what was lacking. That's what's lacking in our culture, is that stewardship of it's not just about getting the right job, but it's like getting the right reality, getting the right relationship with being alive, and so if that was, I think I would have been pretty psyched. Actually, I would have been like, that's fucking great. But also totally like confused and like I have no idea what you're talking about.
So where I was going to go with it was to make a joke that the younger Jonathan would probably say, up your medication, because he hasn't had any experience with these things, and people who haven't experienced it and they're just kind of living within the matrix. If you tell them that, oh, this is all a simulated, constructed, reality for us to experience, but it's not really reality. It's the matrix. And everyone within the matrix goes, what? What other reality are we talking about here other than the one that is I can sit on? The reality where I can, this rock that's sitting underneath me is a piece of inanimate matter. It might be shaped into a throne. It might be rolling off of a mountain, but it's still just a rock, and there's nothing more to it. And if you're thinking more that there is more to it, then maybe you should get your head checked. So that's what I was kind of getting at, is that you're experiencing something that you don't have the frame of reference to understand yet. You're finding that there are people like Carl Jung who've been through it, and which if you're like me, you look at that and you go, okay, he was a very famous psychiatrist, obviously had his head together. If he experienced this and went through it and he's not crazy, then that means I'm not crazy too.
Right.
Okay, yeah. So you see where I was getting at. You can start to question your own mental health when you go through this kind of stuff.
Oh, absolutely. And he did, for sure. He definitely thought he was going crazy.
He did. Yeah. So what led you then, you're going through this transformative experience, and what gave you the idea that you would find that you were what you were looking for at Pacifica?
Well, it was an odd, well, first of all, it was that, reading Jung, which was like, suddenly there was this language, suddenly there was a context that was wide enough, broad enough, that was different than what I was being, what I had been shaped by. And so there was room. There was like, all right, I guess suddenly there was like the ledge, the cliff got a little bit bigger, like the precipice was a little more roomy. And so I found out about Pacifica. I don't know how it came across my path. I forget. But there was, I think it was that there was a curriculum devoted to Jungian thought. So I was like,
yeah,
of course, that's where I have to go. Like that's,
yes,
that's all I need
makes
to know.
Perfect sense. Yes. Okay.
Like I can get a degree. I can kind of, I can understand this and then get some kind of degree in what's happening to me. And that was my conviction. It was for me, it was survival. It wasn't because my body was occupied, it was not, it was like I felt like I was a hostage. So I was like, okay, this is, I don't have a choice. And I think I was living in Brooklyn at the time, and there was this weird sculpture on my desk, on the kitchen table that my roommate had. And I one day I just asked her, like, what's going on with that sculpture? And she was like, oh, that's my sister. She went to Pacifica. She had to do it for her, like, class. It was like a weird class, and, plastic art. And I was like, what? I was like, and so I had just, I think I had been really sort of had my sights on Pacifica. And so the fact that, and I was living in this sort of, as in Greenpoint, really literally up right against the canal and the water in this old rope factory. And then there's this sculpture, which I had just spent 2 years sculpting, and the person who had made it had made it at Pacifica. And so I was like literally at the end of my rope, in a rope factory. And I was like, I can't believe that. And so at that moment, I think it literally felt like the image I had was, being pulled by a whale, like that was in the water, like 100 yards from me. I was walking down the street, and I needed some kind of vehicle to get me there. And my best friend's ex-girlfriend, I ran into her, and she was like, I was telling her about what was happening to me, and she was like, we're selling our pickup truck. And so I bought it from her. And then there's a loading dock next to the factory, and I just shoved everything like Steinbeck, like Grapes of Wrath, just shoved everything in the pickup truck, including the mattress. And I just, drove west.
I love this. Now, I know he hasn't shared any dreams about how the dreams are influencing this process up to this point, but this is just like dreams, to really ask and sometimes almost demand that we make big life changes. Right now, this is just like a deeply intuitive, synchronistic thing that's happening that just feels like it's calling him that way, and he needs to answer it. But there's so many times where our dreams do this for us also, because they're connected to that synchronous, intuitive function within us. It's all coming from the same source, that pull, that, oh, we got to do this, we have to do this. That soul, And I mean, if you look back through our catalog, if you look at our most recent episode with Val, the plans for calling her on the path, away from what she had always known, to take a big leap, to go down that path. If you look at Jim, he was shown an image of kids that he would adopt years before he even was ready to adopt, you know? If you look at my story of the episode, If You Want to Come Into Your Power, and just how much my dreams asked of me during that time period. If you look at the episode with Lisi, the dreams are inspiring her to up and quit her job. Dreams can ask a lot of you, you know, because a lot of times at that point, we either sat on things that we knew we were feeling inside of ourselves that was, you know, just deeply wanting to be answered. And so finally the dreams are like, look, this is kind of now or never. If you don't answer this now, I don't know what to tell you. And it doesn't always have to be so do or die, but as human nature is, sometimes that's the kind of kick in the butt we need, you know? So the dreams will give it to you. They'll stick it to you, and they're pretty unflinching when they show up in that capacity. And we definitely need it. We need that stern kick in the ass sometimes. There's no doubt about it. And if that's what's needed, dreams will they'll gladly give it to you. There's nothing easy about it, you know? But there's something so fulfilling to know that you have that deep support behind you that is like, you have to do this. It's time. There's something special about that. So even though it's challenging, even though it's hard, even though it's asking everything of you, it's some deep part of you that's asking that is crying for that. And you gotta honor it. You just have to.
Wow. Huh. All right. Well, you, this is, you are on your night sea journey now.
Yeah.
This is a reference to something that Jung said, and that there's a journey that you go on that is like being on a boat out on the ocean at night. And it's, you know, you can't see very far. You only kind of have a vague sense of where you're going. But you got to do it, because now you've pushed off from shore and you are in the boat and you're out there on the ocean, and it's dark, and you are going to have to just trust that you're going to end up, you know, in the place, the other shore, wherever it is you're supposed to end up. You just have to trust that it's going to happen. So Jonathan, that really takes, you know, you must have, what in God's name were you thinking? I mean, you know, you're just going to pack up everything that you own into a pickup truck and head out west. And, you know, I mean, we do know what you were thinking, but, you know, I say that tongue in cheek. But again, we're kind of creating a contrast between the social, conventional, safe point of view that keeps most people from making these sorts of leaps of faith. And then there's the other point of view, the red pill point of view, that's saying, I don't care if people think that I'm crazy for picking up, you know, leaving my life and going out somewhere on this crazy quest. It's just something I feel like I have to do. Mm. And so, you know, now that there was a reason why you belonged at Pacifica. You know now that it wasn't just coincidence that the factors came together for you to go out there. What was pulling you there?
Well, it was that I'm a white, privileged, you know, pretty well educated, you know, heteronormative guy, and I'm in Manhattan, and I grew up in Manhattan, and so there was no meaning. I was isolated. I was in kind of weird psychic pain. There was no value. You know, I mean, people come to, you know, leave to come to the city to have fulfillment, and it was a dead end for me. It was, and that was a really, you know, frightening feeling. And so when turning to this what was happening to me and having some kind of validation, suddenly there was something opened up, a different space opened up that I couldn't deny. And so it was just, I'm going that way. And that was something that was more real than anything that was around me, or, and that was such a relief at the same time to be like, okay, this thing that was afflicting me has now carved a path out of a kind of desert, a kind of emptiness that was in some sense more of a psychological emptiness, that it wasn't even, but that had permeated into my reality, and so it really did feel like there was nothing, I had nowhere to go. And so it was an exit.
Okay. And I want our listeners to know that when I know what happened when you were at Pacifica, at least to an extent, that you went there trying to find out what is the thing that is engaging me from the background. It's invisible, but it's intelligent, and it's aware. It's a presence. I can feel it in my body. So this is not a figment of my imagination. It could easily be confused as a symptom. Oh, you've got, generalized anxiety disorder, and that's why you're feeling this way. And, here, just take this pill. But you went out there knowing that there was something. It opened the door for you to get there. You knew that you needed to go there because your life needed to change. And while you were at Pacifica, you explored what is not only behind the reality of our waking reality, but also of our dream reality, that there is something that is there that is creating spaces for us to interact with it. And on one level, you can read those dreams just as, sort of in a standard tools of interpretation and analysis. And if you want to get to the other level, then you start reading the dream as something that was created for you to participate and interact with this larger intelligence that made itself aware to you. So I want our listeners to know, this is the dreams that shape us. And, up to this point, Jonathan and I have been talking about what led him to this point in his life. And he has made a discovery or explored into an area of dreams that is not very well known. But I wish that everyone knew it, because when you know that there is an intelligent source behind not only your dreams, but all of reality, then if you're like me, you get very curious about what it is and what it wants from you or for you might be the better word. You say, what do you want from me, God? And God says, no, it's what do I want for you, fool? Like I want for you to have the life that is going to bring the most satisfaction and fulfillment and depth, the most interaction between you and all the people in the world and all the creatures in it and Mother Nature itself. I want you to have an experience that is something that you can brag about, for the rest of eternity. You can say, yeah, man, that life, that was off the hook. That rocked. I loved that. So you're on your way out to Pacifica, and this thing is waiting for you. And well, tell us what happened when you got there. And
well, it got worse. and
okay, so the storm comes and the boat's rocking.
Done. And my ego, it needed to die properly. And so like I found this little tiny. So the idea was that I wanted to be as close to Pacifica as possible. So because it was like an immersive program where you go once a month for 3 days, and I was like that. I can't, I just need to be close. Like I'm not going to fly, whatever. I was just, so it was like, this is my, I was taking it very seriously. So I was like, I just got to be close as I can get. And Venice, California was the closest I could get. So I was still a city boy, you know? And so I lived in this tiny little, like pie sliced, apartment on Oceanfront Walk, which was pretty, at the time, pretty seedy, pretty ghetto in a way. And things escalated internally. And so the rituals got more pronounced, the energy got more pronounced. And so it came to a point where I had so many little rituals that I had to, I had to just literally stop in my tracks. And
so you're referring to kind of the OCD rituals where, you know, don't step on a crack, you know, or if there's a tree. I had a friend of mine who used to impulsively circle around trees. We'd be walking down the sidewalk and he would just see a tree and he'd be like, I'm going to walk twice counterclockwise around the tree, then go back on the sidewalk and join my friends. Be like, Mike, what are you doing? And he explained it to me one day. He goes, something felt wrong about the tree, and by walking around it, I made it right.
Right.
And then I feel better.
Exactly.
And I'm like, huh. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Cool. You know, like,
well, those stopped working. And I mean, and they got pretty neurotic, you know, like I couldn't look back. I couldn't turn my head. I couldn't breathe all the way. I couldn't sit down. You know, like all these, like, I was trying to stay in control of whatever was left in my somatic experience. And so I literally had just stood there. I had this blue carpet, and I just dropped, and I started to I started to weep, like I was grieving. Something swept through me, and like I fell, and I was just, because I was like so done. I was so done with this. I was so done with it, you know. I was like, how can you continue to do this? And I didn't, and it was the strangest thing, because it was like this grief that I didn't even think was mine. It didn't feel like mine. It was this, and I never broke down like that in my life. So it was this. Yeah, I was almost howling, like and there was incredible release of energy. And I remember that I went to the beach, sat on the beach, and I remembered that it was like as if the world had inverted, and the inside was on the outside, and that there was this sort of tactility to everything, like this kind of
everything around you is an interface to your inner world.
Yeah, it was like the skin. And so and the weird, so the weird thing was, I had gone, I think just prior to that, I had gone to a Halloween party in the Hollywood Hills, and it was actually Fred Astaire's old house, apparently. And as we were walking, this coyote slipped in between houses, and I had never seen a coyote before, so I was transfixed, and it felt like we had shared this look, this glance, and it sort of penetrated me, and and then it went away, and I couldn't get it out of my head. And in college, I had taken a class on the trickster by this a famous writer, teacher, authority on the trickster, Lewis Hyde. And he had read to us this story, one day in class about the coyote. And it was this beautiful image in my head that always stayed with me, was kind of coyote with a stick and a sack, just sort of like cruising, in between worlds in the desert. And in that, so in that moment, after seeing the coyote, those two images merged, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. So I emailed him, my teacher, and I asked him, where did you get that story from? And he said, oh, actually, I read that not from my book, but from the direct translation of this of the Nez Perce. I don't know how to say that name. This tribe in the Northwest, from their mythology, and it was called Coyote the Interloper. And so he said, you can find it in the public library, I'm sure. And so I did.
So he did say it right, but he second guessed himself. The indigenous name of these native peoples is the Nimipu, and they are from the Northwest, mostly north central Idaho on the Columbia Plateau. The French gave them the name, which in French is pronounced Nez Perce, which in English is usually pronounced Nez Perce, which is what Jonathan has said. So we just wanted to make sure that we honored their tradition because of how incredible this story is that is about to come to life for Jonathan. Enjoy.
And I tracked it down, and it was in the 5th floor in the LA Public Library, under 5th floor underground. So I was underground, and it was the genealogical section. So it was like, and I started reading the story, and I couldn't, and my jaw just dropped because the story was describing behaviors, OCD behaviors that I was doing to manage my anxiety. That this was this coyote, down to the language of it, and I was like, it is just, I was stupefied, and I couldn't comprehend it yet. It was the most healing, sort of validating thing to experience, that there was something about the coyote that was explaining this. And so the story that is interesting, because his daughter is burned alive. She has to go to the ancestors, the places of the ancestors, right? The genealogical section. And he follows her there because he just can't let her go. And he's given all of these, once he's there, he's given all these controls, like you can't move until nighttime. And then at nighttime, the ancestors come out and you can party and have a good time. And so this goes on for 3 days, and then she comes. She says, you got to go now. You're not supposed to be here. And so she gives him this sack, and she says, you have to go, and you can't look back. Don't look back. Which is one of my own negative OCD controls that I would tell myself all the time. Don't look back. And so I'm like reading this in this story, and she's like, don't look back until you've crossed the 5th peak. And here I am 5 stories below in this library. And so I'm like, my mind is the circuits are just blowing as I'm reading this. And so he's traveling, and he gets to the 5th peak, and the pack that she's given him becomes so heavy that it pulls him down, and he falls back, and he has no choice but to look back. And she jumps out and said, with the Wolf brothers, that's another part of the story, and says, you fucked it up. You were bringing back immortality, and now you've screwed it up. And now there has to be death. And then he just breaks down and cries and weeps. And so, like, the very fact that something brought me to my knees was on my back that I was carrying, that was so heavy, that just brought me down, and that I just sort of wept and like had this breakdown, this was all being detailed in this story that I happened to look up because I saw a coyote, in the Hollywood Hills. And so I was like, there's got to be there's a strange intelligence to this. There's a curation to this. There's a telos, that's the Greek word for like, there's a goal. It's a goal oriented. That's what Jung described. The psyche is goal oriented. And so I just, and then crazy the next day, I think, so then I had my whole breakdown on the beach, and my classmate came to me and she handed me a box. She's like, I don't know, but I had to give you this box. And I opened it up, and it's a coyote skull in it. And I was like, I can't believe this. It was just like it just kept happening. And so.
And she had no idea that you'd read the story, that you'd seen the coyote the night before. She just decides out of the blue to give you a coyote skull.
Yep. No clue.
It has to be coincidence. Right. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
It's when people experience this there's sometimes that you need to experience this from the outside world speaking to you in a way, because this is where our orientation is. Things happen in the outer world. They are real. They are provable. And when there are these outstanding so-called coincidences, which we know are synchronicities, meaningful coincidences, from the awareness behind the scenes that's setting things up so that you have those experiences, people find it more believable. But on the other side of it, you can also have these experiences through your dream life. And I think that sometimes that people prefer to have them in their outer life because they say that it's provable that there is some kind of an intelligence speaking to them through these, remarkable series of events. Whereas if it happens in a dream, then you can say, well, yeah, sure, I met God, but I'm sure it was just a figment of my imagination. Or something happened in a dream and it affected my outer reality. My outer reality responded to what happened to me internally while I was dreaming. And that's when the rabbit hole really opens up. Because like in Matt Cochran's case, he has the dream about the antelope. He goes out into the woods and has an encounter with an antelope, and then continues having encounters with them.
Yeah.
So the outer world validates what's happening to him internally. And it began with his dream space. You had a similar experience, except for it's
without a dream.
Without a dream. Yeah. Except life is really starting to probably seem like a dream at that point, because definitely. You're bending reality. When you have these coincidences, these synchronicities happen, encountering the coyote, having taken the course to begin with the professor who knew about this myth, happens to read from it. Right. You happen to find it. When you were telling that story, it reminded me when I encountered The Last Temptation of Christ. A friend of mine played the movie for me, and I was like, wow, man, this is really cool. And I heard the music from it, and it's a Peter Gabriel soundtrack, which to this day, Passion, The Last Temptation of Christ, is one of the most beautiful pieces of music that I've ever heard. But I went and I found the book, and I went to my university library, and I look it up in the card catalog, and I'm going and looking for it, and I'm like, wait, what's this? I'm like trying to figure out the prefix. It turned out that we had a classics library, which is on the other side of campus. And I'm like, oh, great. So I leave the big library. I'm going to find the classics library. And I remember having these chills going through my body, like head to toe, and really powerful. I mean, you get the chills, you get a little shiver. Like this is whole body shaking, because I knew there was something waiting for me in that book. And I go deep into the classics library, like, deep, like place that nobody ever goes to. The dust is so thick. I pull this book off the shelf. I open it up, and the opening line of the book is talking about how throughout his life, he had identified with the Christ story as a battle where these two armies have met, and his soul is the battlefield. And I'm like, yes, right here. My head is like my scalp, the goosebumps are so big. I felt like they were visible. Like my hair must be standing up because my head is so energized right now that it's like sticking my finger in a socket. Yes, my hair is going to stick out in all directions. I'm electrified. So that was my experience with it. And that book did lead me to things that there was a reason why that book was put in front of my eyes.
Yeah.
It gave me the courage to completely to question everything about the Christ story that I had learned growing up in the sort of traditional Christianity. And then I got to know Jesus in a very personal sort of way. I understand what what your experience with the coyote reminds me of that experience that I had.
Yeah.
So at this point, you are already taking the graduate courses at Pacifica, right? And you're living there in Venice, California, kind of in this, little bit shady sort of part of town. The experiences that you're having internally are intensifying. And it's gotten now to the point where you've had this remarkable series of, synchronicities that has literally brought you to your knees. I mean, I'm picturing you there on the sand, like on your knees, having an epiphany, but also, having a breakdown in a way. You said that your ego still needed to experience that ego death. Tell us, pick up from there and tell us what was going on with you.
Yeah, I don't know how to explain that other than that. I guess I needed to switch egos. It was more like from the from the personal. So for Jung, it was the personal ego and the impersonal ego, and so I think it was a shift in orientation to being having a different center. Having a different focus. And so I literally...
The ego self axis is what they call it in Jungian psychology. And it's a shifting away from the ego being aligned only with itself to the ego being aligned with the larger structure that it's part of the psyche.
Right.
So while you're experiencing that shift though, what happens?
So I moved.
It's kind of like a pole shift, like you become completely disoriented for a while at least.
Well, it's like it's funny because in the myth of the coyote, his tent is burned down, so he has he has to move, and it really felt like that was my tent burning, and ironically, then the same person who gave me the coyote skull was living in this retreat center in Ojai, California. So she said, "Look, just come here and take a break," and so I literally. Again, put everything in the pickup truck, drove up to Ojai, and then literally at the top of this land, this ridge, this sort of wild piece of ridge in the Ojai Valley, on top of, at the highest point, there was a tent, and I shoved my mattress into that tent, and I lived there for a month. And that was it. And that ground was teeming with coyotes, and it was like... And so it was like, and it was this homecoming in a way, because now growing up in concrete, and now I'm like, there's rattlesnakes under the tent, there's mountain lions, there's coyotes, and I'm in a transfiguration, and this is something my skin is so, thirsty for. It was this kind of contact with the world, and it was happening. So I lived in that tent for a month, and then I stayed on and lived there for another year and a half in this yurt, and I worked there, and I kept going. And the only thing I kept doing was, the only thing I could do was keep writing. That was the only thing that kept me sane, was to keep writing about what was happening. So I was using the coursework as a means to stay sane, in a sense, like to track it, to track what was happening. So each assignment I used to understand what was happening to me. And that basically led me to, because I was taking out loans to pay for this and to live on. And so each year was an experiment. And so I was like, I guess I'll do this again. And then by the third year, I had all of this. I had a master's without even realizing it. And then I had 3 years of coursework and this body of work. And I was like, I guess I'm writing a dissertation now. And so that's when the dreams came in. And that's when the dreams really took me into a next level. And because now I had moved from the foundation, Ojai Foundation, and living in this canyon at the end of a road. I'm like studying alchemy. And so I was, and my whole point was the body of my work was to describe, to understand the unconscious as a physical experience, to write it from the body, to understand the unconscious through the body. I mean, that was sort of my setting, my core setting, was because people had been talking about the unconscious as this concept, but I couldn't understand how did it relate to my life? Like, how did it relate to what I was experiencing? There didn't seem to be this huge lacuna in how does the body play a part in this? Because it's like fucking trampling my body. Like, why? And the more I wrote about that, the more it hooked deeper into the theories and helped me understand it. And then one night I go to bed staring at this alchemical image that in Edward Edinger's book, who's a sort of a big force in depth psychology.
Scholar and very big name in depth psychology. So yeah, go ahead.
So we're studying alchemy, the tradition of alchemy, and I'm like going through all these images, and I they're just like speaking to me, and I fall asleep looking at one thing, knowing that it has something to do with what I'm experiencing. Like at this point, it's that feeling like you said in the Matrix, where you're in it, you have an intuition that this is how things are, but you cannot articulate it. And so it was like the image was articulating it for me. And I went to bed in this crazy experience of like this energy that wouldn't leave me alone. And it was like these pistons pumping in me, and it was like electrifying. And finally fell asleep, and I had this wild dream. And then I wake up in that sort of hypnagogic space, like the dream is lingering, and this blue waves are lapping up against me, and it's saying chimeran connection, chimeran connection. It's repeating itself over and over, this woman's voice. And I wake up with that strange sentence, chimeran connection. And and it was very physical feeling that I'm waking up with. So it's like it's sort of the physical sensation of anxiety that I've been haunted by is now like feels present in this image through the dream and this voice. So I'm really like, okay, I'm tracking this. I'm staying focused. I'm go to school, and I can't get chimera or chimeran out of my head. And so I look up chimera, and it's the equivalent of the basilisk, which is an alchemical image in which you have like a dragon, a lion, a bird, a goat. It's just like, it's sort of a Frankenstein kind of concept, disparate parts coming together. And the basilisk is was the image connected to the image I fell asleep in, which was the image symbolizing psyche being freed from matter. And I was like, oh my God, this is the next step. This is the psychoid. This is what Jung called the psychoid, and Freud talked about it. That's sort of where psyche behaves like matter and matter behaves like psyche. You can't tell the difference. It's the interface between psyche and matter. between the psychic
Yeah.
and the material. And so, and that this figure was being literally stretched out of this lump of clay. And it's a Christ figure. It's a Christ symbol. It's this is Mercurius, this alchemical spirit. And so then I'm off to the races. And then now I've got a topic for my dissertation, and then the dream that had come before that, I then, ended up dissecting, doing a deep dive into, and it was this in a way I couldn't even begin to articulate now, but it was a so I would talk about rabbit holes. I went down like 80 rabbit holes in that dream, and the dream, as I was following it, it followed me. So that
will you walk us through the dream?
Oh my God, it's like it's yeah, we can. So I'm entering an apartment in Manhattan, and I'm meeting these two boys, and we are greeting each other, and then we go to this room, and then we are playing we're playing catch inside this room, this huge room. And what I realize is that the two brothers were never, it was always one brother, but in the dream experiencing, I saw them as two individuals, but it was really, in looking back, I realized it was one brother the whole time, and that he then comes apart, and he's throwing something to himself, and so the idea is that he's coming apart, and I'm in this great apartment, and this great coming apart. And so the dream is showing me how it comes apart and starts to stretch itself. And there's this texture that I can't, it's like the substance that's lapping up against me. And I realize that's present throughout the whole dream. And so it's this series of apartments coming apart in the whole dream, these different, and I realized, but even though it's coming apart, it's staying the same. And I'm like lost in this. I'm just like, and every time I'm deconstructing it and taking it apart, it becomes something new, but then stays the same. It never changes, but becomes completely, it's this paradox. And it just, and no matter how much I take it apart, it stays together.
It sounds fractal in a way. The further you get into the image, you keep finding that the image repeats itself, but there's also these, infinite complexity to it, and you can never find yourself. There's no bottom to it.
Exactly.
Okay. And the splitting, the apart, the two boys, and you find out that it's actually one boy who's playing catch with himself. This really pinged me because there's a sort of a philosophy, panpsychism, that the whole universe is one mind experiencing itself through infinite variations. So you could see us as 8 billion human beings living on the planet Earth, but there's really one in a way.
Right.
And it's because there's one mind that's connecting all of us. And each of us as individuals are not just part of that mind. We are that mind.
Right.
that one mind that's experiencing itself through all of us.
And the interesting thing with they're thinking there's two boys, so you could wake up with that, and that could just stay as it is, right? That's sort of one reason why. That's one way to understand the difference that we were identifying earlier.
Yeah.
Right. But if you revisit or you go back into it, you realize, no, there was never two. There was never two. So the whole narrative shifts and yet stays the same. And so that was a really important discovery for me. And there was one thing.
While you think about that, the active imagination technique, this is one reason why Jung used it, and a lot of people have picked up on it, because you think that the dream is the end of the story, but all it is that you have left off from a space that you were in, and it still exists, and you can revisit it through the active imagination technique. And now you start to test it in ways that maybe you can be more conscious because you're now awake, and you can be more conscious in the way that you're going about it.
Yeah.
And you can find out that there was more going on there than what you realized. I have had so many dreams that were inscrutable to me, or at least something was really incomplete in the way that I understood it. I thought that I saw, or the opposite effect, where, I know all this stuff about dream interpretation and analysis, don't I? Yeah, let me look at my dream. I'll figure that out, man. Yeah. And I think I know it all. And then I engage with the dream in active imagination. And like you said, here I am, like twin symbolism, brothers, I'm going like 50 miles with this idea. And then active imagination shows me, no, it's not two brothers. It was one brother, and he was throwing the ball to himself. And chew on that one for a while, smart guy, So this is where I've also encountered this thing that said, I will not be scrutinized with your tools.
Right.
You can try it, sure, but there's more to me, and you won't find out unless you engage with me. I am not a sterile thing to be put underneath a microscope and examined. I'm a living awareness. And I think that's where Jung also really launched off. That realization for him became his launching point, where he became not just a doctor, but a healer.
Yeah.
And he related to his patients, not as doctor to patient, but as person to person. And he took himself down off of his pedestal, because he was humbled by how his great mind was shown that it was only scratching the surface of what there was to know. And he would never know it unless he gave up his ego.
Yeah.
That part of him that was driving, the ego aligned with itself. There was something else that called and said, align your ego with me. And now we go down the rabbit hole, and now you find out what's really there.
Yeah.
So is that what you were going through? Something like that?
Well, what was so interesting was that when I was driving to school that day, I was listening to Morning Bell by Radiohead, and it was somehow it became the soundtrack, and I couldn't get it out of my head. So I looked up the lyrics, and it's about, and there's this great line that says, "Cut the kids in half, cut the kids in half," and there's something about standing on the furniture, because in the dream the boys were playing on the furnitures, and it was just like mayhem of like young boys playing and roughhousing, and so it was this. And then later I found out that they were using the tarot deck to write that album, and so it was like this. And also that you get a sense of the duality, the personality number one, personality number two, and that they actually aren't separate, and so this sense of this two-headed boy, this two-headed consciousness, this double consciousness, was for me the essence of the psyche and matter, and so this incredible. Yeah, it was.
Oh no! Yeah. Okay.
It was just playing with me. I mean, it was just like I thought I was dissecting in this like rigorous academic way, but it was just kind of playing with me the whole time and having fun, and
yeah, because you're engaging with matter in a way of the sort of the classical rational materialist, which we all are, because that's what we've been, the paradigm that we've grown up in is that it's dead matter. There's no intelligence or awareness
right.
to it. You stand on the rock, it's just a damn rock. And then you start to find out, no, actually, I, as the conscious being here, I'm psyche. This thing underneath me, the rock that I'm standing on, is matter. And guess what? We are two ends of a spectrum. And if you're intelligent at one end of a spectrum, consciousness, psyche, you're intelligent at the other end of the spectrum too, but in a different way. That means that an intelligent, what I mean by that, not like IQ test intelligent. I mean, it's sentience. Yeah. So this is what Jung said. He said that when you get to the bottom of psyche, you find yourself in matter, meaning the material world. So when you go to the bottom, and you're talking about, using alchemy and active imagination techniques and stuff that take you deep down into yourself, depth psychology, something that they teach at Pacifica. You get to the bottom, and where are you? Mm-hmm. You're in the world now.
Right.
The Hafez and other Rumi, some of these great mystic poets have said the same thing. And I tell you, if you haven't been through the experience and you read this stuff, you're like, God, these dudes have been smoking something, but then you experience it for yourself and you go, yeah, well, there you are, smart guy, they were right all along. So you discovered through this dream that something that you were already being led to, which is that that psyche and matter are really one. Is that a fair way of saying it?
Yeah. And I don't know, for me, that, in what Jung says in his experience with these dreams and his hallucinations and visions, and his question, his inquiry was, okay, so there is a direction, the dream, you wake up with the dream, it's coming to you. And his question was, is it a two-way street? Is it not just a one-way street? Is it a two-way street? And that if it comes to you, can you go to it? And that really kind of summarizes it for me. And that this is that's what I found in my work, that I can talk to it. It talks to me. I can talk to it. And so
now, in meditation, in dialogue inside your head, are you using a technique such as active imagination?
Well, I mean, where this is going ultimately is I ultimately started a practice called dream work, where I essentially am trying to share this with clients, where that the dream isn't a narrative, but it is a dialogue, and that is ongoing, and that's what I found in writing my dissertation was that when I revisited the dream, that it would continue, it would resume, which is something that's in the short, how Jung described active imagination was the resuming of the dream, picking, and so there's an implication there that the dream isn't a dream, right? That it's an extension of your consciousness. So it's not necessarily, the dream isn't something that you're resuming. Rather, it's sort of it's an entrance into. It's kind of like that, the dream that I had, this entering this apartment, it's like, and so that from one perspective, you can look at as a dream, that you wake up with, or it's a prompt to interact with a certain kind of consciousness that is.
So is it fair to say that the dream is like a space that you enter into, and
Yeah.
then you can re-enter it? But you can do it consciously. You can do it on another night of dreaming, but it's a space.
Yeah.
And each dream is sort of its own space that is created for you to experience.
Right. It's like an
reality simulation.
It's an imprint of that space. And I would argue that space is also present in our conscious experience with anything any images that you encounter. So a chair in front of you is at the same time a direct object, an objective form, but it's also a noetic form. It's also an image. And that image is at the same time something that you can interact with as part of your self, in terms of, so the ego self-access exists not as a concept, in referring to the unconscious, but as part of the spectrum of your experience.
Oh, and so that interface, the chair, the image of the chair becomes the interface with the larger consciousness.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
With an impersonal consciousness, with one that has a different orientation.
Yes.
And so for me, it's just grounding it in our experience, and the dreams are a constant invitation. And so my point being is that as I would go back into a dream and be writing it, I would notice that something subtle would happen to my awareness. Something became very creative and spontaneous, and it would remain within the contours of the images of the dream, but yet continue itself. And so, and it would have a kind of also this sort of superordinate in regards to my life, a position. So that like memories would come in, feelings, wishes, repressed matter, and it would, but it was being kind of conducted by the imagery or the material of the dream. And so if you enter the dream in a very particular, careful way, you are in some ways kind of extending or interacting with or interfacing with that kind of more quantum activity that is connected to just being, a conscious being. But it's very subtle. It's not something that's like, that can be sort of manipulated. Rather, it's kind of manipulating you.
Yes. Yeah, we want to measure it and quantify it and put it in under a microscope and examine it and find out exactly how it works and explain it in terms of Newtonian physics and Einstein's relativity, in a way that we understand how the world works. So if we find something that's interesting, what do? We pick it apart until we understand it.
Right.
And it's almost like this is what I'm picturing, is Jonathan, is that so you pick it apart, you divide it in half and you go, oh, I had one, now I have two. And then each of those divides in half and you go, oh, well, now I have four. And then I have 8 and 16 and 32 and 64. And next thing you know, we're in the millions and billions. It keeps dividing. We keep finding something new about it, even though at division number 3, we thought we would probably be at the end, because this is where Newtonian, and relativity, this is where our science and our known understanding of the world can take us. We can go so far into it. But once those divisions start reaching infinity, then we have nothing in our frame of reference to understand it. So we think that we are examining it, but it is really examining us.
Yeah.
But letting us believe, that we are in this objective viewpoint, that we can step back from things be totally separate from it, and understand it as within this closed system. And we can say, okay, A plus B equals C, or whatever equation you want to write.
Right.
And every time you encounter this phenomenon, it will, E equals MC squared. It will follow the formula. Because if it doesn't, then that means that our entire paradigm has to be questioned about what our reality really is and what is our place within it. And we start to find out that we think that we are object studying subject, but now we can flip it completely around and say, no, there is an objective psyche, and we are the ones who are being subjective. And the world is responding to us. The physical reality world is responding to us to allow us to keep our illusion that everything is objective. Because this is the parameters that we've set on this, or that something else that, the dungeon master back there says, okay, well, or the computer that's creating the matrix says, okay, well, this is if this is the parameters of the simulation, you agreed to it, but now you're in the simulation and you don't remember that these are the parameters that you set. And so now you're living within the simulation, and you're trying to find your way out of it. Because I think that humans have gotten lost within our own simulation, and that it's now spinning out of control. But you were about to say something really profound. I can tell.
Well, I think it's a mutual transformation, and it's another kind of Jung's idea that it's not just that the unconscious is changing us, but it's that we're changing each other. And I think that's a really interesting, that raises the ethical sort of barrier or standard, that we have a responsibility. Like this is growing. Consciousness is growing. It needs to grow. And so I think that simulation in some ways is just the fabric that it's really, it's interesting. The Matrix does have a good, it's really helpful in a way, because you have those two ends of the spectrum, which is that sort of robotic, digital, dead world. And then you have that sort of the digital holographic world, where everything is programmed and simulated. And then but when you wake up in the dead world, you actually are awake and alive. And then, so then how do these come together? How does that evolve? And so what's interesting is then you have those, like you have Neo and even the agents, I think in the second one, where they're interacting with the simulation in a different way. They're revisiting it. They're kind of growing it and altering it, and that then shifts the collective fabric. So I think that you need both. It's going somewhere. For me, it feels like it's going. That we are growing, just as nature grows.
That's really, that's really interesting. And that there is a point behind this for both, unconscious and conscious to grow. And there is something through all of this seeming randomness of people being born, the earth is turning, the sun is shining and now it's not, the sun goes down, the sun comes up, the sun goes down. We go through these patterns, right? And our lives can sort of get into these patterns of regularity that sort of, you kind of forget that there's more going on, that there can be. I mean, it's happening whether or not you're aware of it. But that we, and the point I'm getting to is that we as conscious beings are a counterpoint to this other thing, this unconscious mind that existed before us, because it's sort of the parent of all consciousness. If you follow Jung, the unconscious is the parent of all consciousness. So we as conscious beings are like plants or trees that grow out of its soil. It was already there, but we grow out of it. We become a different form of life consciousness, where, the tree is different than the soil, but the tree is made of the soil. Everything that the tree is came from the soil. in its interaction with, with the light and with the water and the air and all that. So you're saying that
Well, I'd
we're
say
both growing and evolving because of this interaction.
Well, I would even say that we are its growth. We are its body. That it before, as a parent, was sort of in potentia. We are its extension. We are the psyche is extended. It's like that was Freud's last note before he died. Psyche is extended and knows nothing about it.
So go further into that, if you don't mind. Explain what he means by that and what you understand of it.
Well, that it comes into consciousness and knows nothing of it, which means it can't be represented. And it needs to stay what it is and yet be in consciousness at the same time. So which is to say that we do have this relationship with consciousness, but it's very dimly felt. And yet that dimness is this sort of fertile density that is will always be there and is at the same time it's kind of like that the anxiety that I felt in the beginning. I mean, you just think about the word anxiety. What does that cover? What does that mean? What images come from that word? I felt dimly in a physical, somatic way, this presence. And even though I felt it and could experience it, I couldn't say that I knew it, and yet I'm conscious of it. So that's therein lies that psychoid, or like psych, that the interface where both are present, where I feel it and know it at the same time, yet the knowing is more of a feeling and the feeling is more of a knowing. And so that, I think that's what he really meant, was that this is really, consciousness is really a kind of, or that we when we say unconscious, it implies the wrong thing. It implies that we're not in touch with it. We're not experiencing it. We're not living it. When in fact, I think what the unconscious means is this form of human being where what you know is what you feel, and what you feel is what you know, and that there's this. That's the nature of the soul, and that it has more to do with us than we realize, than we know. I think I'm going to keep rambling now if I don't.
No. I'm picturing that we go about our lives thinking that, okay, well, if you're versed in the unconscious mind, that it's this thing that's in the background. You access it most readily while you're dreaming. It's responsible for a lot of the autonomic processes of the body, breathing and heart rate, but also the processes of the psyche. The instincts arise out of the unconscious, instinctual behaviors. So you're not aware consciously of their source, but they're definitely affecting you, how you think and feel and behave. And so we tend to try to classify what the unconscious is and how it affects us. And then by implication, we as conscious beings are something that is separate from it in a way. Even if you think of it as like something that grows out of the soil. Okay, that great analogy. The conscious mind grows from the soil of the unconscious mind. But what you're saying is that the entire experience of life, it's all the two are interpenetrating each other in a way that they can't be separated.
Yeah.
The two boys
Right.
in your dream.
Exactly. Yeah.
So there's one boy throwing a ball to himself, and to the observer who's looking at it, it's two boys throwing a ball. And to another observer, it could be 3 or 4, or, a whole city full of them. And like a fractal, you can keep dividing it, and it can look different at first, but if you change your perspective, you'll find out that it's a repetition of the same image.
Yep.
And behind that image is something that is us experiencing ourselves. And even in our very own, like in our everything that we experience in our bodies, there's a reason why we chose bodies as a vehicle for having these experiences, because the body is this, it's the way I picture it is it's like a receiver that's picking up the signals from somewhere else, that unconscious place, so that it becomes what it is. It takes its orders in a way, sort of like its blueprint. It says, okay, this is what the body is going to be. This is what it's going to look like. But at the same time, the blueprint manifests in the body to have the full experience of life through it. So what we used to think of as this divide between the two, they really meld and merge and become one thing.
Right.
Wow. Okay, man. Let me ask you, you've obviously gone very far into this. And if you had someone who said, Jonathan, this is pretty mind-blowing. I want to take the red pill. I want to find out I want to find out what you've found out. I want to experience it. I don't want to just hear about it or read about it. I want to experience it. How would you tell them to do that? What would be the first thing that you would say that's going to help them? Maybe there's not one thing, but I want our listeners to walk away. If they want to know what this is about, how do you, if you're Morpheus and you're teaching them how to leave the matrix, how do they do it?
Well, what I was thinking about is the idea of instincts, and is an idea that it's something that you aren't in touch with, right? That's some kind of hardware that's kind of pumping in you without your awareness of it. And for me, what my red pill was my own body, it was my own anxiety, it was my own rituals, which was my own neurosis, which was my own images, my own fantasies, my own that there is it's not as far-fetched or out of reach as you might think, and that there's this, we all, I think, have this mental jewelry, and and some are decked out, some aren't, some so it's just a I remember just dreams are one way in which I think I was always sort of predisposed to the unconscious, which I would say as the instinctual, which is what I would say is this kind of sensation, and a kind of otherness. And so I remember as a child, you know, when I would look, it's so funny now I realize, like, when I would come to the water's edge, it was wildly exciting to me to see the water in contrast to the edge, to the land, and like there was something happening there that was almost terrifying, but also exciting and really magical
and energetic,
and that I was in unison, or I was in some kind of harmony with that, some kind of resonance with that. And so what I would say, you know, and that brings me back to the dream of the, you know, the blue water sort of lapping up against me as I'm waking up. And do you have the courage or the awareness or compassion to give something like that a chance to live in you? You know, that's already, that which is already there.
Yeah. But in a more conscious relationship sort of way.
Yeah. And
I mean, what you're saying is through your own body, it is also experiencing itself.
Yeah.
I mean, your body and what you experience in it, as you know, the sensory experience of life, we think of as the most personal thing, because the anxiety that you felt, other people might feel anxiety, but it's yours. You have the experience of it. And even though other people might experience something similar, it's not the same. They're not having your experience. You're not having their experience. But what you found out is that everything that you experience as an embodied being is a shared experience.
Shared with something. and that,
well, what is it?
Well, I think that's why it's called the unconscious, you know, not because it can't be known, this is because it can't be named, because it can't be appropriated by language or consciousness, and yet it is you and not you at the same time. That's why I feel like it is this deep intimacy with something that is you, but is not localized to this egoic experience. And so
or maybe even not even to material reality. When you say localized, maybe it's universal.
Yeah. And I think it's a twinship. I think that's why this sort of splitting and doubleness and two-headed boy, cut the kids in half, that theme speaks to this. We all have this, you know, what Hillman, who's another big player in this arena, called the Gloria duplex, is this double consciousness, that we have access to this otherness that is us and not us at the same time, and yet needs to grow, it needs to become. And that's something that's not, it's universal. I just don't like the word universal, because I just think of like Universal Studios, and it gets like really commercial in my head really, really quickly. But like that it's deeply human, that it's ancient, and that it's sacred, and that we've been living as like an orphaned from it, and yet it's the most, for me, it's been the most medicinal, the salve. It's been the nectar, the ambrosia for my wounds. Even though like I try to be a materialist, try to be a consumer, I try to be a modern human being and try to find comfort, and there is comfort there, and I try to, still check the boxes, but it's this, to me, has been the most healing and the most fulfilling and the most grounding, embodying of my lifetime, and I think it's what I was searching for in acting and theater, like that kind of primordial contact with what happens when the lights go down, and your imagination is suddenly aligned, and it's given form and meaning, and there's something that in the story that that we need to tell each other, that we want to tell each other, is really so important for us as to be, who we really are. And
so wonder and curiosity is when you approach this thing and you want to know what it is and you want to experience it for yourself, you used the words sacred. And to me, it implies, well, humble for one. You don't know it all. So when you approach this thing, you are asking it to reveal itself to you because you don't know what it is. And you don't have the faculties at where you are right now for understanding what it is. And then also, like, I'm picturing when the curtain goes, the lights go down and there's the hush in the crowd, like there's that sense of anticipation. Something really interesting, even magical, is going to happen tonight. And even though it's the actors on the stage who are acting out the story, the audience is playing the role too, because they are receiving the story.
Right.
And in a way, they become part of it,
right.
Which is a lot like a dream, because you're receiving this thing, this story, but then you are interacting with it, and there becomes it adds a dynamic to it, so that it's more than just a story, more than just a narrative. It's becoming an interface for you to interact with the thing that created the dream in the first place.
Yeah.
Which we can say, oh, it's the unconscious mind, and this is what we understand about it. And then we find out that it's only the beginning of what it really is. So what you are actually interacting with what is behind the scene, what is creating the dream, what is creating the matrix, is actually something that wants you to know it. And by you finding out what it is, maybe we're helping it figure out what it is. Does that resonate with you, or do you have anything to add to that?
Wanting you to know it implies that you are it as well, that it wants to know itself, and that the reason why we don't have the faculties to understand is because it creates understanding through you. It becomes, there's a mutual becoming. And I think that's why the idea of the alchemical wedding, it's a wedding. It's a marriage, and there's a kind of a mystical union there that they like two lovers, that need each other. I think it's more of a romance in a way.
Yes.
That they they're kind of lost without each other. It's not, and one is not more privileged than the other, I think, because it's sort of they're opposites.
But they're equals, because if it's a marriage, they're equals. And if we use the traditional marriage of male and female as our model, yes, they're opposites, but they're also equals, and there's a sameness to them, because what do they share in common? They're human.
Right.
So although we could say that there's mating in the animal kingdom, more than just human, right? But as an idea, so if we boil this down to what the listeners can do, it would be approach it through your heart and through love, like you are looking for the thing that loves you and wants to be your mate.
Yeah. It's
that's a whole different frame of reference, bro. I mean,
well, and also it's listen. Listen to it, and not as a problem, not as a affliction or as a blight, but listen to it as an intelligence, as a presence, even though it can feel like a wound, and it can feel,
or a symptom.
yeah,
Because what you like, your anxiety ended up being the call that took you deep into yourself, but it could have easily been just written off as a symptom and not understood as something using your body to make you aware of it, and in a way it made you uncomfortable, as an out of your comfort zone, so that you would get curious enough to find out what was really going on behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm. And I think that, to keep it simple or concrete, if the next time that you write down your dreams and interact, listen to what you're thinking about, and listen to what it makes you think about, and listen to what it reminds you of. And don't worry that you're, quote unquote, leaving the dream, because you're not leaving the dream. You're really entering it. You're only really entering it once you think about it, and how it's, and then it starts to, what happens is it starts to think inside you. So we have these associations, and we think, oh no, that doesn't make any sense. That doesn't apply. But that is it thinking through you, making connections that you're not capable of making.
Right. So if I have a dog in my dream and I'm making associations, which is a classic technique for dream interpretation, where I think off the top of my head the words, memories, feelings, ideas related to dogs. And so if I go, oh yeah, there's a dog in my dream, what do I associate with it? Oh, Christmas. Well, what does Christmas have to do with a dog?
Exactly.
Well, that spontaneous thought that came to mind is the mind of the dream that is now, by you engaging with the dream content, the mind of the dream is able to continue the conversation and tell you, or maybe not tell is the right word, but it's communicating something to you through that spontaneous association. And what seems to be spontaneous and just contained within your own mind as a conscious being is actually you, as you interact with the dream, going further with the conversation that you had in the dream. The dream is a conversation with this other thing that is experiencing itself through you. So when it says Christmas, it means something by that.
Mm-hmm.
That the dog was really just an image that was wrapped around that idea to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
And when it says Christmas, it's telling you what it really means.
Right.
And I'm racking my brain trying to think of, well, what could a dream mean by a dog that the association is Christmas? I happened to look up as I was thinking, and I saw a Christmas decoration. So, it seems like a bit of a random association.
Well, what's funny is that I see the star on top of the Christmas tree, and then I think of the dog star.
There. Okay. Yeah. And so that's the way that this side of the mind communicates.
Right.
And I say this side of the mind because I'm still locked into the dichotomy of unconscious and conscious. And I think I really gotta rethink this. But if there is the association that it's coming to you, the way that it's speaking with you is through imagery.
Exactly.
It's pre-verbal. Yeah. So it's not going to just sit down. When we say we have a conversation with it, people think, oh, conversation, two people or more sitting down talking. And you go, no. Well, this is with something that speaks through images. Mm-hmm. And the images are like pictures that say 1,000 words. So, you have that star, dog star. We started with a dog, then Christmas, then the star, and now dog star. And then that could get into a whole set of associations and ideas that could come to you, through the astrological meaning of it and its position in the sky. And, there could be something personal it could associate with a memory you had as a kid, looking at the sky and looking at the stars, and something that you experienced And now the dream is referencing it because this is how it communicates with you.
Mm-hmm.
And really, in a way, with itself, because your experience is what it's drawing from to have the conversation. But your experience is also part of its experience.
Mm-hmm.
So in a way, it's talking to itself.
Yeah.
Which I feel like I'm doing sometimes. But Jonathan, this has been fascinating. Thank you for sharing what it sounds like years of your life, and you're trying to distill it down into what we could talk about in an hour sum of time. And I realize that we're limited in the way that we can, you can't present your dissertation, right? You have to kind of distill it down so that we can understand what it is that you've learned and what you've come to understand.
Mm.
And I think that the idea has gotten across very well in this interview. And I thank you for sharing that. Is there a way that if our listeners want to look you up to find out more about you and your work, is there a website or social media or anything like that you want to drop on us?
Yeah, there's a website that I made. Thank you, by the way. I'm very, very grateful for you having me and to give me this opportunity to unpack, these experiences that I've been carrying like the coyote for it seems like ever. And so it feels really timely and validating to be able to share this with you. And so thank you.
Oh, sure, man. Yeah. Happy to. It feels like that's what I do, man. I'm the carrier of the sacred dream, man. People keep sharing this stuff with me, and I'm like, wow, what did I do to deserve this?
Christmas,
like in a good way. It's Christmas, yeah. So thank you for that, and it does go into the role that I play also as the keeper of people's dreams. They share them with me, and they're sacred experiences for them, and so. Yeah. But yeah, you were saying the website.
Yeah. So, I mean, I made a website about 3.5 years ago, just not as a means to have some place for people to come to if they wanted to do this kind of work. So it sorely needs to be updated. But there is a contact page or, where you can submit a dream or you can reach out and contact me. And I have since set up a practice that, I call it dream work. And you can find me on Psychology Today. And, but you can also
spell out your name, Jonathan, and because we're revealing who you are.
Jonathan,
you're a practicing psychologist. Let's hear it.
Stidger, might as well get that in there. It's my middle name, Stidger, Hyland, Hyland. And so the website is thedreamsdoctor.com, which is the dreams plural, like with an S.
Gotcha.
Doctor.com. And you can also just email me at dreams@thedreamsdoctor.com. So yeah, but the website's it's fun, but it's maybe not that instructive.
Oh no, it's I just pulled it up. And okay. And this gives us a place. I want people to be able to know if they want to know what this is, to have this experience for themselves, or just to find out more. I mean, you wrote the book about it, right? I mean, you wrote a PhD dissertation, that explores something that has been a question that we have asked of ourselves as a species, as human beings, going as far back. I mean, we could make a references to Plato's cave, and I'm sure that what the Greeks were talking about, 2,500 years ago, was something that people thousands of years before them were talking about. It's just, it didn't get written down in the same way. But we've had these same questions about what is the nature of our existence. And it's not something where most people are, what they're going to do is point you towards a body of knowledge or thought that they already know of or that they believe in. And instead, what would really serve them best is to teach them how to find these answers within themselves, to give them the tools that they need, the practices that they can follow, the mindset to approach all of this, because that is really the most valuable thing that you can offer. You had this experience, you learned from it, and yes, you did turn it into a dissertation. But as a dream worker, would you say that what you can really give them is the way for them to find out and have these experiences for themselves?
Yeah, and I think that's what I'm trying to offer with dream work. And I use the word dream work because Freud used that word. That is, it describes the process in which the unconscious is forming the dream inside us. And
yes,
and so that in the basic offering I'm saying is that continues to happen. That doesn't just happen at night. That happens when you interact with a dream. It happens when you are thinking. It happens when you're imagining. That is, and so how to make dream work that process conscious in you.
And a full-time occupation, because you find out that everything you're doing interacting with the world this is a cycle where from dream to wake and wake to dream and so on is a cycle that are both affecting each other. So it's sort of, there's no fixed barriers between them. They're permeable. In fact, they're so permeable that you can't really separate the two distinctly. You can describe them. Well, this is what it's like when I'm asleep and I'm dreaming. And this is what it's like when I'm awake and I'm not dreaming. You can describe the states of being, but what you're finding out is that there are so many interpenetrations between the two that maybe, like some of the great mystics have said, life is but a dream. That this is that the waking life is an extension of a reality that we also experience while we're dreaming. And the two are so interconnected with each other that there's no practical way of distinguishing them other than through our way of saying, well, this is awake, this is asleep, this is dreaming, this is not. But there's actually much more going on to it. So we want people to find this out for themselves. And that's the only way to find out. You can't read about it. You can read about it, yes. But if you want to know, then you've got to experience it. And if you want to experience it, then you got to go about it like you're looking for your mate. This is a marriage. You're searching with your heart, and it's the thing that loves you more than anything, and you will love it, and it will be the place where you belong. Without a doubt, you belong there. This is home. And when you find that thing, it becomes a marriage. Right? Is there more that you want to add?
As far as I can tell, that is right.
Brother, I tell you, you twisted my brain a little here because that was a lot to. I wish Steve would have given me a little more heads up of what I was about to walk into.
Ambush.
Man, he's been texting me like, man, are you talking to, yeah. Wow. Yeah.
It was coyote ambush.
This is, yeah. It's funny. I live in Tucson and we've got them everywhere, and you won't know how many of them there are until like the full moon rises or there's a clap of thunder. Like sometimes if it starts raining, and you'll hear them coming from all these different directions. I live right in the foothills of the Catalinas, so we have a lot of open, land around us. It's not rancher territory, but we have an acre. Everyone around us has an acre, and across the street, everyone has 5 or 6 acres. So there's a lot of open territory for these guys to run around, and you see them everywhere. And when you talked about the coyote and the trickster and, the way that it spoke to you, I was like, yeah, I've seen them around here too. And they're really fascinating animals, very easy to miss if you don't, they don't make themselves known to you unless there's a reason. I mean, you can randomly see them crossing a road or something, but like they're there, but they're so easy to overlook because they don't want you necessarily to know that they're there. So it's pretty fascinating. Oh, man. Yeah. Well, thank you, Jonathan. This has been a fascinating conversation. I'll get this over to Steve as soon as I can, and we'll start working on this to get the episode out. It might be a while. It generally takes us a few weeks to a month or more.
No rush. Take your time. And there was, I'm great. I'm so grateful. I didn't see this coming either at all. And I had my own trepidation about, because and you navigated that so gracefully, because I was hemming and hawing about it, and as I was unpacking it with Steve, I was like, there's no way that this is gonna translate or like, and so your reception of it was so critical, and so your curiosity and your openness, like the very thing that we're talking about, what you hosted it, and the fact that we did it today, I thought we were just going to be like, is this viable? Can we do this? Does this, and the fact that you opened the door for that to actually come out.
So nope, we're going to record right now. You ready?
So it was, hats off to you, man. And I'm, so grateful that Steve was kind of persistent in a way. Because I think he's been through something similar. That's what Matt told me, that he was very reluctant to share some very private, experiences.
Yeah. And that's coming. Actually, the Grinch episode, I don't know if you've heard it, but he lays it out.
Oh no, I haven't listened to it yet. I'll listen. I got a big drive tomorrow, so I'll listen to it.
Dude, yeah, he does. He lays it out, and that's what he said at the end. He's like, "Man, I've been holding that for so long," and he finally now it's out, and it's a whole series of dreams that he had, and it relates back to the Grinch. And
wow,
he nails it. So
I can't wait for
cool. That. Yeah, man. Yeah, you're gonna love this. All right, hey, man. We're gonna stay in touch, and awesome. I'll be in touch with you or Steve will. But I know our paths are gonna cross again.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks again, man.
Thank you, Jonathan. Take care, man.
Okay, bye.
All right, bye.
Well, this concludes another episode of the Dreams That Shape Us podcast. This podcast is created and co-hosted by JM Debord and me, Steve Ernenwein. And as always, all of the original music you heard here tonight was created and composed by me, Steve Ernenwein. And there was a track that was played by Radiohead called Morning Bell. And since we're running late, we'll keep it nice and short. In the show notes, I'll put the link where you can listen to my new album and the link for Jason's website where you can find all of his books and classes. And I will most certainly put Dr. Hyland's info in the show notes. One more time, it's thedreamsdoctor.com. That's thedreamsdoctor.com. You can find him on Instagram at The Dreams Doctor. You can find me on Instagram at AQ_Dreamwalker. And you can find this podcast on Instagram at Dreams That Shape Us. Please come and find us. If you're on Instagram and you listen to this podcast regularly, please come find us. It would be amazing to touch base with you and reach out. Hit me up. That'd be awesome. So thank you for everyone listening out there. We really, truly appreciate it. If you can share this with somebody that you know would just love to just have their mind pretzeled by this episode. We would deeply appreciate that. We thank you so much. A big and handsome thanks to my man, Dr. Jonathan Hyland. Oh, so glad you told this story, brother. We'll talk soon. Thank you, everybody out there. And as always, nighty night.